Very few authors have approached the subject of the Beatles with the sole intention of a complete analysis of the songs and music itself. This is one of the main reasons why Wilfrid Mellors, the author of Twilight of the Gods, the music of the Beatles, is an entirely unique entity in his field. The Washington Post praises Mellors' work by saying that among the dozens of books that have been produced on the Beatles, Mellors stands alone because he focuses almost entirely on what actually happens in the music. Mellors himself lends insight into possible reasoning why scholarly writings are limited in this field, as he outlines in his prologue that it is extremely difficult to compose written analysis without the readers actually listening to the songs themselves. He goes on to say that written notation can represent neither the improvised elements nor the immediate distortions of pitch and flexibilities of rhythm, which are the essence of a music orally conceived. Although audiences are urged to read the book more so as a companion to the songs, the element of transition from song to literature provides an unavoidable limitation on this analysis, a limitation that Mellors himself recognizes. Where the book's preface and prologue focus mainly on the complexities of transition from audio to comprehensive visual, it also compares and contrasts the Beatles' music to dominant genres of other cultures to help situate the Beatles on a global scale. These genres include, but are not limited to, native Indian music, country, gospel, and Negroid music. One example Mellors uses is that Any Time at All is the most Negroid of early Beatles songs, directly recalling not only the blues, but more decisively the gospel shout. This helps to relate to this week's theme of culture, as different global influences are seen in the Beatles songs, which give the music different feelings. This is also notably representative of British culture during the 1960s, as readers are given insight into the question of whether British culture was its own unique entity, or whether it was slowly becoming molded by other nations, including North America. Mellors quotes John Lennon to have said, "There was nothing big in Liverpool. It wasn't American." Lennon also mentions that his first encounter with music was country western music, providing concrete evidence for Americanization in Britain, indicating that British culture was declining during and even before the 1960s. The most predominant strength of this book is Mellors' ability to analyze thematic elements of multiple songs through the use of melodic techniques and lyrics to gain insight into the Beatles' lives and careers. The second chapter focuses mainly on the Beatles' Hard Day's Night, which takes an extremely detailed and analytical approach to this song. Mellors does not merely analyze these songs as texts, but instead as stories. In this chapter, Hard Day's Night is compared to I Want to Be Your Man to demonstrate and represent the theme of transition between innocence and experience, which is a predominant theme in what Mellors refers to as the first period of Beatles music. Mellors describes I Want to Be Your Man as mainly primitive, but leaves you wanting more. The fade-out technique is also mentioned, as he believes that it is equivocal, not because the experience is out of time, but because we can't see an end to it. Mellors uses the primitiveness in this song to represent the innocence, whereas inexplicable attraction and melodic technique is used to represent the song and the songwriter's experience. Hard Day's Night is also analyzed and contrasted both on a lyrical and melodic level. In Hard Day's Night, the innocence is represented by the lyrical description of the excitement received from the ecstasy of holding someone close, and the experience is represented by things and money, the more tangible, shallower aspects of the lyrics. Beginning in C major, though the opening sustained chord is arrestingly a dominant of fifth, the C major triads at the beginning of the tune sound more so like dominants in F than tonics in C, which set the tone for the entirety of the song according to Mellors. He also argues that the coda crystallizes the ambivalence between home and the world outside, for the floating B triad is a dream of bliss won through by the reality of false relations. It is analysis like this of small but meaningful details which allow Mellors to use the melody to aid and demonstrate how different melodic techniques can be used to emphasize lyrical and musical meaning. By analyzing both I Want to Be Your Man and Hard Day's Night, Mellors is able to demonstrate that the interpretation of themes may not only be derived from the textual lyrics, but the same critical analysis can be taken of the melody to examine the multiple themes that arise in the music of the Beatles. Revolvers in Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields is the title of the third chapter, which similarly to the second chapter takes an in-depth analysis into what Mellors describes as the more developed works of the Beatles. The song studied in this chapter can no longer be seen as adolescent, nor is it relatable to the conventions of commercialized pop music. Emphasis is put on these two songs as they are specifically hallucinatory on the Revolver album as a result of the LSD experience. The use of hallucinogens while songwriting creates a mental utopia which the Beatles help to relate to their own childhood. Both songs are deeply poetic, which naturally finds reflection in the music. Penny Lane melodically incorporates a rising B-flat major scale to imitate a kid's street jingle to help incorporate the idea of childishness memories into the song. Strawberry Fields contains a dreamful descent accomplished by a lunge to a flattened dominant seventh, which again aids in the comprehension of a mental utopia. The hallucinogenic atmosphere is maintained through vaguely shifting rhythms as well as the monotone vocal. Mellors views both of these songs as crucial to the Beatles' career, as drugs are becoming major influential factors in their songwriting process, which shift thematic elements as well as the melodic and lyrical aspects of the song. While Mellors does an impeccable job of analyzing the songs and the Beatles as a whole, he also provides beneficial analysis of each member, which is useful to readers as it provides a collective understanding of each of the fundamental aspects that make up the group. Each member is analyzed on what unique and specific talents they attribute to the group and how that allowed for the group as well as solo success. Not only are their specific musical techniques closely examined, but also each member's experiences, which help to evolve the music of the Beatles from its original dance music to something much more deep and meaningful. Mellors himself is a composer, which adds to the tone of the book. Although this allows for an extremely knowledgeable and academic account, his bias towards certain genres of music is quite detectable throughout his analysis. As a composer, he has his own musical taste, and is obviously favorable towards certain types of music. He describes current pop music as the intensification of primitivism due to the fact that electronics create a nightmarish inflation of pitch distortions. Mellors does not attempt to hide his disdain for current popular music and his favoritism for rock and roll, which adds an underlying tone to the book that alters readers' perceptions. One aspect of the book that could have been altered to appeal to wider audiences is the use of language. Although Mellors does include a useful glossary at the end of his book, he often uses unfamiliar musical terminology and phrases without proper explanation, which can leave the musically inexperienced reader at a loss. Words such as ear and eye musicians are examples of this, as they are used frequently and may be interpreted by the reader incorrectly without proper explanation. Another downfall of this book is that although the use of primary sources is abundant, there's absolutely no reference to any secondary source material whatsoever. This may be due to the fact that there's very little scholarly writings on the topic, but the fact that absolutely no scholarly sources are referred to somewhat decreases the credibility of the author's arguments, as they are not properly supported by other scholars on the subject. While the book is an entirely unique entity with excellent analysis of melodies, lyrics, and thematic events of the Beatles songs, there are numerous downfalls which take away from the usefulness of Mellors' writing. Although the transition from audio to textual is somewhat unavoidable, some of the downfalls could have been amended. Mellors' bias could have been avoided by approaching the music and lyrics from a completely neutral perspective, as Mellors' own personal feelings on type of music do not benefit the reader's knowledge of the Beatles in any way. The use of unfamiliar language could also have been avoided with proper explanation without the assumption that the reader is already an expert on the subject. Lastly, the incorporation of secondary sources is somewhat self-explanatory. There are numerous scholarly works on the Beatles. Surely Mellors could have found some to help support his arguments. In conclusion, this book was very well written on a knowledgeable level, however, it's somewhat lacking on a practical level. While Mellors surpasses analytical expectations, the apparent weaknesses of this book perhaps take away from the success it could have achieved.